3. Hyuga. The Hyuga was one of the two Issei-class battleships that were built for the Imperial Japanese Navy (IJN) during World War I. Construction finished in 1918, but the battleship never served in the conflict. During the Russian Civil War, it underwent several patrol missions off the Siberian coast in support of the fight against the Bolshevik Red Army. On September 1, 1923, the main Japanese island of Honshu was rocked by the 7.9 magnitude Great Kanto earthquake. At least 140,000 people tragically died in the disaster. Many families were cooking dinner when the catastrophe struck, causing fires to erupt and spread, consuming everything in their paths. The Hyuga aided survivors in the following days as emergency responders on the ground fought to extinguish the flames. Throughout the late 1920s and the 1930s, the ship spent a lot of time cruising off the China coast, although its exact activities are somewhat of a mystery. By the time World War II started, it had become largely obsolete and was one of Japan's oldest battleships. The vessel didn't see much action in the war's early years, despite serving as an escort ship in the Pearl Harbor operation. In May 1942, one of the Hyuga's turret guns exploded, killing 51 crew members. The turret was deemed irreparable and was removed, and the ship was sent to the Aleutian Islands, where it continued to play a less significant role in combat operations than Japan's newer battleships. After the Imperial Japanese Navy lost most of its aircraft carriers during the Battle of Midway, the Hyuga was converted into a hybrid carrier, with a runway replacing its rear gun turrets. The changes increased its length from 708 to 720 feet, as well as its fuel storage capacity, while reducing its displacement. It was capable of accommodating 22 aircraft and had a crew of 1,463 officers and enlisted men. Between May 1944 and February 1945, the Hyuga served under Carrier Division 4. But Japan lacked enough trained pilots for its full carriers, and the converted ship never fulfilled its intended role. In its planning of the counterattack against the US advance into the Philippines that came to be known as the Late Gulf Campaign, the Japanese military planned to use the ship to carry a group of aircraft. But the air group was destroyed before the counterattack happened, and the Hyuga was instead tasked with misleading American forces as a decoy ship during the Battle of Cape Engaño in late 1944. Early the following year, the ship carried gasoline and other supplies from Singapore to the Japanese city of Kure, successfully evading multiple attempted attacks by nearly 24 Allied submarines along the way. Shortly after arriving in Kure in late February, the 4th Carrier Division was disbanded and the Hyuga was put on reserve. It remained anchored in Hiroshima Bay for the rest of the war with no fuel or aircraft, functioning as a floating anti-aircraft gun platform. 3 weeks after the vessel arrived, more than 240 American aircraft attacked Kure. 3 bombs struck the Hyuga, killing 37 and injuring 52 crewmen. About a month later, the ship was towed to another part of the bay. In an effort to camouflage it, the Navy painted it olive green with dark green splotches. When the Allies attacked Kure again in late July, the Hyuga was hit by 10 bombs, destroying its bridge and stem and causing multiple fires to break out. Over 200 sailors were killed and 600 were wounded. Over the following days, the ship began to take on water and sank in shallow water as the surviving crew members scrambled to remove any easily accessible weapons. They abandoned the ship 3 days later, and it was officially removed from the Navy Directory several months later. It was dismantled and scrapped the following year. What if battleships were never made? How different do you think battles would be? Tell us what you think in the comments below and hit subscribe while you're at it. 2. Yamato. Built for the Imperial Japanese Navy shortly before World War II, the 840-foot-long Yamato and its sister ship, the 800-foot-long Musashi, were the heaviest and most powerfully armed battleships ever constructed. In 1934, Japan withdrew from the League of Nations and the Washington Naval Treaty, a post-World War I agreement between major allies of the conflict to prevent an arms race by limiting naval construction. While the agreement restricted the size and power of naval ships, it imposed no rules on the number of vessels a navy could build. By then, Japanese officials knew that their battleship supply was vastly outnumbered by the American fleet. And while the US and Japan wouldn't go to war for several more years, they already had developed a rivalry in the South Pacific, where the American military had a growing presence. Knowing that they couldn't compete with the number of US battleships, the Japanese set their sights on building a few massive ships that would be capable of engaging multiple enemy battleships at once. No longer bound by the Washington Naval Treaty's obligations, the IJN started to build the Yamato and Musashi in 1937. They took great efforts to keep the construction of the vessels a secret from the prying eyes of other countries. With the looming prospect of war growing, the IJN rushed to finish building the Yamato and completed it 3 months ahead of schedule. It was launched in 1940 and commissioned a cure in Hiroshima Bay in 1941. The occasion was marked with a subdued ceremony to avoid tipping the Americans off about the ship. With a fully loaded displacement of 72,000 tons, the Yamato was at least 30% bigger than any of its enemy ships. It was equipped with 9 46cm 45 caliber Type 94 naval guns that were capable of firing explosive and armor-piercing shells up to 26 miles. At over 69 feet long and weighing more than 162 tons each, they were the largest guns ever fitted to a naval ship. The vessel was also armed with more than 150 machine guns, most of which were capable of shooting 220 rounds per minute, and some that could fire at twice that rate. In addition to being heavily armed, the Yamato provided Navy sailors with some of the most comfortable living accommodations of the time, including air conditioning in some parts of the ship. Some of the highest-ranking naval officers lived aboard the vessel, and even the lower-ranking members of the 2,000-man crew enjoyed 10 square feet of living space each. The Yamato made its combat debut at the Battle of Midway in 1942 as the flagship of the Japanese combined fleet. American codebreakers had already learned of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's plan to disperse his fleet to lure Allied forces into a trap after intercepting the order for what the Japanese military called Operation 10 Ichigo, Heaven Number 1. Consequently, Yamamoto's plan failed, and after a few days of fighting, he ordered his battleships to return to Japan. While the Yamato was superior when it came to size and power, it fell short in some ways. Equipped with underpowered engines, it had a relatively slow top speed of 31.5 miles per hour. It also burned a lot of fuel. In August of 1942, the ship arrived at Truk Lagoon in the Central Pacific, where it remained for the next year due to its high fuel consumption and slow speed. There was also a lack of ammunition on board, preventing the ship's crew from engaging in full-scale warfare. The Yamato fought in several major battles against the Americans through 1944, including the Battle of the Philippine Sea and the Battle of Leyte Gulf. After the Allied invasion of Okinawa in April of 1945, it became clear that Japan was losing the war. Desperate to gain an upper hand in the conflict, the Japanese military began resorting to increasingly extreme tactics, including a suicide mission known as Operation Tengo. Instructed by his superiors to attack American forces at Okinawa before beaching the Yamato as a gun battery, Vice Admiral Saichi Ito and his fellow officers dutifully set sail on what they understood to be their final mission. Once the ship was destroyed, they were to join the island's defenders and fight to the death. But the Yamato was traveling without any air cover, and the Americans detected its presence as it approached Okinawa. US forces wasted no time launching an air attack and pelted the ship with bombs and damaging its water damage control station. This prevented the crew from being able to flood certain parts of the ship to stop it listing when it began taking on water. Several hundred crew members died in their attempts to right the vessel, and Ito eventually issued the order to abandon ship. Just minutes later, the Yamato began to capsize. It soon rolled over and was blown open in a massive explosion. Only 280 members of the ship's 2,778-man crew survived. 1. USS Zumwalt. In 1994, the United States Navy initiated a research and development program to design land attack ships called Surface Combatant for the 21st century, or SC-21. The chosen design, known as the 21st Century Destroyer or DD-21, called for a distinct tumble-home hull that grows narrower above the waterline than its beam, along with 2 long-range guns and 128 missile tubes. The DD-21 program ended in 2001, but a lot of the technology developed during the project was used in the designing of the USS Zumwalt. Construction began in 2009, and sea trials commenced in 2014 after facing delays due to the 2013 government shutdown. The ship was finally commissioned in 2016. Measuring 610 feet long and 80 feet wide, the Zumwalt is the world's largest stealth destroyer. It's named after Admiral Elmo Zumwalt, the youngest chief of naval operations in US history. The ship came at the hefty cost of more than $3.5 billion, more than twice the cost of the Navy's Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, which are some of its most powerful ships according to the Associated Press. And while some insist that the money was well spent, others have called it a failed design. The military claims that the Zumwalt is harder to detect than other ships of its kind, owing to its lightweight composite superstructure, which reduces the vessel's cross-section and acoustic output. Its knife-like bow is said to make it more stable in heavy seas compared to other ships of its kind. The vessel is equipped with state-of-the-art technology. It includes a fuel system that draws carbon dioxide and hydrogen from seawater, and an advanced multifunction radar system that's capable of conducting air surveillance in crowded and difficult conditions. But it has faced numerous mechanical issues, and plans for its top-of-the-lines weapon system failed to meet expectations. The Zumwalt broke down in the Panama Canal shortly after entering service in 2016, while traveling from Baltimore to its home port in San Diego. Water had gotten into some bearings, causing the ship to lose propulsion and hit the lock walls. It had to be towed through the rest of the canal by tugboats and underwent repairs before continuing on to its destination. In 2018, Military Watch magazine reported that the Zumwalt and the other 2 vessels in its class suffered from poorly functioning weapons, stalling engines, and an underperformance in their stealth capabilities. The report goes on to say that the ships have failed to fulfill their intended purpose, and even if they did, their development ran too far over budget to justify the cost. Military expert Sebastian Roblin seemed to agree with this view in a 2021 National Interest article, describing the vessels as an ambitious but failed concept. He wrote that they lacked several vital features of a multi-purpose destroyer warship, including anti-ship missiles and anti-submarine torpedoes. Ammunition for the weapons that the Zumwalt does have were ultimately taken out of production due to cost. After the Zumwalt encountered a host of issues and the second vessel in its class, the USS Michael Monsor, failed during sea trials, the Navy began to consider alternative uses for the ship. Their first idea was to refit them as dedicated ship hunters. Shortly before he retired in 2021, former US Strategic Command leader General John Hyten suggested refitting the ships with nuclear cruise missiles. But the military ultimately decided to equip the Zumwalt with hypersonic missiles, a goal it's hoping to achieve by 2025. Known as the Common Hypersonic Glide Body, CHGB, the weapon system that the Navy plans to implement uses a rocket booster to fire missiles at more than 5 times the speed of sound, or around 13,000 miles per hour. Originally developed as part of a modernization effort undertaken by the US Army and Navy, the CHGB is designed to be both maneuverable and difficult to detect. For now, the Zumwalt remains lightly armed and seems to exist more for show than anything else. In September 2022, it traveled to East Asia as part of the Task Force 71 Destroyer Squadron 15 Squadron of the 7th Fleet, which operates out of Yokosuka Naval Base near Tokyo. Former Navy captain and military analyst Carl Schuster told CNN that the Zumwalt's presence in the region is more political than military, as it awaits the installation of the CHGB system. Whether the military will live up to its claims about the ship's planned superiority this time around, after already failing to do so once, remains to be seen. Thanks for watching. Which one of these battleships is your favorite? Tell us in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.